Hi, I'm Eric. This is the Long Box Review comic book podcast, and welcome to my comics history. Today's episode will be about comics that were published in September and October 1979, specifically those comics I purchased then, those I purchased later, and any notable comic books that came out at that time. Then I'll be discussing the two that I bought. As a reminder, these are on sale dates that I have taken from Mike's Amazing World of Comics. And the two comics that I purchased back then are Amazing Spider-Man number 199 that came out September 11th. This is where Spider-Man battles Mysterio. And New Adventures of Superboy number 1, which came out on October 25th. DC had pulled Superboy from Superman family and his own comic book, which was then taken over by the Legion of Superheroes, to start this new series, and I was happy to be along for the ride. Given those two issues, my DC versus Marvel count thus far, the Superboy issue is the 14th DC Comics that I have purchased so far, and Spider-Man is the 15th Marvel comic that I have purchased. For things that I purchased later that came out at this time, so the September comics include Brave and the Bold number 157, which is Batman and Commandy, which I have read, but I don't remember anything about it at this time. Detective Comics number 487. I think I bought this because of Ditko's The Odd Man appearance, which I heard about on a podcast, which was probably the Bat Pod, maybe. The cover image by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez was reused on Detective Comics Classics, published in 2011, which reprinted stories from Detective Comics 377, 384, 385, and Batman Family number 1, but curiously not Detective Comics 487. Anyway, the cover shows Batman and Batgirl swinging away from a building with Robin leaping over the edge to follow them. Next up in September is Marvel Team Up number 88, which featured a team up between The Thing and Invisible Woman. I got it because I developed a kind of crush on Sue Storm, which, longtime listeners may recall. I read it, but I recall being not satisfied with the story. Green Lantern number 123, the cover declares back in solo action. I love this Gil Kane cover with Green Lantern flying at us and away from the Earth. Mostly, it's a great image, but mostly I like it because many, many years ago, one of my cousins who, she was an artist, she drew this cover for my version of some Lantern character that I was creating. And I love that. I wish I still had that drawing. Let's see here. Next up for September is Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 258. This is the penultimate issue featuring Superboy and the last issue of the Superboy title. It would change to just the Legion of Superheroes in number 259. And then finally in September, Time Warp number 2. I've talked about this before. I continue to have not read this sci-fi anthology. I really, really need to correct that. In October, the comics that I got later did Daredevil 162. This is an issue with Steve Ditko drawing it. I believe the cover is definitely Ditko. It features Daredevil fighting a leopard, and I have not read that yet. Adventure Comics 467, which is the first issue of the series featuring Plastic Man and the Levitz Ditko Starman, the Prince Gavin version. And I just realized how much Ditko from this time showed up in my collection. I've yet to read that Adventure Comics issue, although I have read some later, as I will note in future episodes. Brave and the Bold number 158, team up with Wonder Woman. I read it, but again, what happened? I don't know. Amazing Spider-Man number 200, which I have read, and you can go listen to episode 200 for more about this issue. So it's kind of odd that I did. I already spotlighted Amazing Spider-Man number 200, and now I'm going to go back and talk about issue number 199. Oh, well. That's the nature of podcasting. Next up is DC Comics Presents number 17, a team up with Firestorm. I read this years ago in the Showcase Presents Black and White reprint collection, but again, I remember nothing. This is not an indictment against any of these stories. It's just my brain does not work well when I'm trying to remember plots and things anymore. Another $1.99 issue, Superman Family, which I have not read, but the cover does tell me that Clark Kent gets mugged. I wonder how that goes. And then finally, mentioned previously, the Legion of Superheroes, number 259, the start of volume 2 of the Legion of Superheroes and the official exit of Superboy. Don't worry, he'll return. He'll be back in less than 20 issues. All right. Notable comics from this time. Notable to me for some reason or another. From September, ROM, number 1. I never got into this comic or the toys, although I did buy a ROM annual many years later, which is no longer in my collection. And it's interesting to note this now as I record this episode because the ROM collected editions are coming out at this time. So anyway, there's that. Next is, or the next few are a couple books. Yeah, these are reprints from Simon & Schuster. One is Fantastic Four and the other is Doctor Strange. So these are part of Simon & Schuster's series of follow-ups to their Origins of Marvel books. They both feature a Bob Larkin painted cover. According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, there was a hardcover and trade paperback version of the Fantastic Four, and this collection features Silver Surfer and Galactus stories. The Doctor Strange has 10 reprint stories in it. Next up is Fantasy Masterpieces number 1, which is a Silver Surfer reprint comic that lasted only 14 issues. And then next is Amazing Adventures number 1, an X-Men reprint comic that also lasted 14 issues. And then finally, Tales to Astonish number 1, a Submariner reprint comic that, as you can guess, lasted only 14 issues. How strange that Marvel started all 3 of these reprint comics, and then they only went for 14 months or 14 issues. I shouldn't assume that they came out monthly. In October, the only thing that is of note is another Simon & Schuster reprint book, this one by Captain America. This, however, has a Dave Cockrum painted cover.
Hey friends, I'm Robert Wilson IV, comic creator, illustrator, and maker of Dreamhouse, an existential suspense graphic novella. I've drawn a bunch of comics, mostly in teams, where somebody wrote it, I drew the line art, someone else colored it, and then a fourth person lettered it. With Dreamhouse, I'm doing that all myself. In fact, I'm pretty much doing everything in the book except for editing, which is done by my good friend Steens. So what is Dreamhouse about? Dreamhouse follows Jack and Jill, a couple on a backpacking trip, kind of working through a challenging time in their relationship. After Jill gets injured, Jack leaves to try to find help. However, what he finds instead is a gorgeous mid-century modern house deep in the woods with no roads in or out that contains a mystery that puts them both in great danger. So Dreamhouse is a pretty unique project in a few ways. For one, at 80 pages, it's 3 or 4 times the length of a traditional American comic book issue, but it's also somewhere around half the length of what you would expect from a proper graphic novel. Dreamhouse is also kind of a genre hybrid. It's not exactly horror, but it definitely has some horror elements. It's kind of a relationship drama, but it's also definitely more than that. I was really inspired by filmmakers like David Lynch and Jordan Peele, specifically Twin Peaks and Jordan Peele's Nope, both projects that blend genre and take genre tropes and elements, but oftentimes take them out of the context that you're used to seeing them in to create stories that are maybe a little weirder, maybe a little more abstract, but deeply personal. And that's what Dreamhouse is for me. Dreamhouse is a project that I didn't have a clear publishing path for. I don't have a clear way to make money from, but It's about identity. It's about my identity, and it's about kind of like the American masculine identity. So this Kickstarter campaign is going to allow me to take the time to finish coloring Dreamhouse, hire a color flatter to help me color Dreamhouse about twice as fast as I would be able to otherwise, hire a book designer to really help me craft a package that ties the whole thing together in a beautiful and elegant way, and produce an 84-page hardcover album. So thanks so much for checking out the campaign. I've got more information below, as well as art and a bunch of different reward tiers. I'd really appreciate your support in helping bring Dreamhouse to life. Thanks again.
Okay, well, now it's time to talk about Amazing Spider-Man number 199. This is a 17-page story for 40 cents back then. Writer and editor is Marv Wolfman. Guest artist, Sal Buscema. Finisher is Jim Mooney, a name I recognize from Legion of Superheroes comics. Letterer Joe Rosen. Colorist George Roussos. And cover artists were Keith Pollard and Pablo Marcus. This issue is titled Now You See Me, Now You Die. And the synopsis is a somewhat tweaked entry from the Marvel Database Wiki. Spider-Man has uncovered Mysterio's operation running out of the same nursing home where his Aunt May had supposedly died. After a battle against his foe, Spider-Man is left to drown in a massive in-ground pool. Leaving Spider-Man to his fate, Mysterio then ventures to the basement of the Restwell facility, where he has a man tied up. This man is the same burglar who shot Uncle Ben years earlier and sought to learn of some secret treasure from Aunt May that was hidden in the old Parker house. Mysterio informs the burglar that he no longer needs him to learn the secret and leaves him tied up in the basement. The burglar swears that when he gets free, he will find the illusionist and kill him. Looking around the room, he spots a mirror close enough to kick and begins dragging a broken piece towards him. Meanwhile, Spider-Man has bought himself some time in the pool by spinning an air bubble around his head. However, no matter how hard he strains to break free, he cannot bust the chains that keep him locked down. Soon, the web sack bursts, and Spider-Man is about to give up all hope of escape when he spies a drain plug not far from him. Using his web shooter and all of his strength, he manages to pull the plug, draining the pool and saving himself from drowning. After resting for a moment, the wall crawler realizes that he is completely dry and that he fell for another of Mysterio's illusions. With the illusion shattered, Spider-Man breaks free from his bonds and rushes away to get some rest. After sleeping for a full day, Peter wakes up in his apartment feeling refreshed. The sleep was all he needed for his enhanced healing to fix his broken arm, so he breaks the cast. Preparing himself a meal, Peter is suddenly intruded upon by his friends Flash Thompson, Shashan, Harry Osborn, and Liz Allen. Realizing that he is still wearing the lower part of his costume with the tunic in the living room, Peter is able to web away the tunic before his friends see it. He also puts on a robe to hide his spider pants. His friends have come to express their condolences for Peter over the loss of his aunt, as well as find out why he snapped at Betty Brant in the previous issue. Peter tells them that he only did it to try and get her and her husband Ned Leeds to sort out their marital problems. Liz informs him that Betty has moved in with her until Betty sorts out what she wants to do with her marriage. With everyone caught up to date, Peter ushers them out, telling them that he needs time alone to process everything that has happened recently. With his friends gone, Peter changes back into Spider-Man and heads for Aunt May's old home, looking for clues as to what Mysterio was trying to find. Arriving in Forest Hills, Spider-Man searches the house again, but finds nothing. It's then that he is attacked by Mysterio and his illusions once more. Spider-Man fights off these illusions, forcing Mysterio to flee back to the Restwell nursing home. When Spider-Man comes crashing in, he is shot with a powerful tranquilizer that Mysterio believes is strong enough to kill him. Despite his best efforts, Spider-Man eventually slumps to the floor unconscious, leading Mysterio to believe that his foe is finally dead. So the cover for this issue shows Mysterio's fishbowl head in the center of it, and in the forefront, while there are 4 panels behind him depicting Spider-Man swinging down toward a street. Spider-Man has a glowing field of white surrounding him, and Mysterio says, "I've got you now, Spider-Man." Instead of landing in the street, Spider-Man's feet go into the street in the second panel, with Mysterio's word balloon saying, "You're going." In the third panel, Spider-Man's lower half is sunk below street level, with Mysterio saying, "Going?" And in the final panel, Spider-Man has disappeared completely, leaving only a smoking spot for the New Yorkers to gape at. Mysterio yells out, "Gone!" The caption at the bottom reads, "Mysterio is another name for madness." I'm fairly certain this cover is why I bought this issue. Seeing Spider-Man disappear like that was disconcerting, and I had to know what was happening. Plus, I had no idea then who this villain was. So, from younger me, good job, Pollard and Marcos, on that cover, even though it's really busy. As to the issue, in some thoughts on it. In the first scene, which I presume picks up right after the previous issue, Mysterio has left and immersed Spider-Man in the pool, perhaps suggesting the cover image. But as Mysterio leaves, he says, quote, "I do hope you can hold your breath a while longer, Spider-Man. I don't wish to personally watch you drown. The trauma might ruin me for the rest of the day," which I find odd. He seems sincere about not relishing watching Spider-Man die, but that last line could also be sarcasm. Even after all these years, I'm not sure how to take those words. When we join Spider-Man in the pool, he laments how he's, quote, "always been a loser," and that with his death, the city will likely throw a party with J. Jonah Jameson buying the drinks. I've always took Peter's self-derision as teenage angst, but now I see it as evidence of low self-esteem and possibly even depression. Of course, he frees himself, but then realizes the water has been an illusion all along. In effect, he would have drowned himself. And so how physically does that work? The next morning, Peter wakes up refreshed and his arm is healed, so he busts the cast off. There is a bit of a continuity glitch here artistically because they show Peter still wearing his Spider-Man glove under the cast before that, but not in the other panels before he busts the cast off. And I won't go into the absurdity that having the cast over his costume was, but it is cool to see him break the cast just by flexing his forearm. I always thought that was really a cool image. I also call into question that his friends do not see his Spider-Man boots below the robe when he comes out of the kitchen. Anyway, later at Aunt May's old house, Mysterio and Spider-Man clash again. This time, Mysterio makes Spider-Man disappear before our eyes and Spider-Man's own eyes, again evoking the cover. Spider-Man knows it's just an illusion, but it still takes him time to overcome it, and he comes to the realization that Mysterio's illusion power, quote, "is as much hypnotic as they are special effects." This then explains this encounter as well as the swimming pool previously. So maybe he could, in a way, hypnotize Peter to drown himself. And this added effect, if you will, makes Mysterio a much more formidable opponent than your typical illusion caster. Looking at you, Princess Projectra. During their fight, Mysterio conjures flames and Spider-Man isn't sure if they are real or not, but decides to trust his spider sense, which tells him the flames are illusions. Only they're not, and Mysterio, according to Spider-Man, has somehow tricked that ability. How exactly? This is just a ham-fisted way, plot-wise, to get around Spider-Man using his spider sense to easily circumvent Mysterio's illusions, but it still makes no sense. Then again, a spider sense that warns Peter of danger makes no sense either, even if it is also a cool power. Eventually, Mysterio gets the upper hand after shooting Spider-Man with a dart. Spider-Man struggles, but does succumb, and Mysterio declares Spider-Man is dead. So I guess his comment at the start of the issue was sarcastic because he just watched Spider-Man die. Or maybe, a slow, suffocating death is more traumatic than, Just watching a person collapse in front of you. Okay. Overall, I recall being so confused by this issue when I read it back in 1979. I had no idea what happened to Aunt May, let alone who this villain was and what he was looking for. But I'm sure I wanted to read the next issue, 200, but that would not happen for another 42 years. Anyway, I point you again to my discussion of Amazing Spider-Man 200 in episode 200 from a few years ago.
Hey, Jay.
Hey, Jim.
You're a fan of the Legion of Superheroes, right?
Yeah, I've been reading their adventures for decades.
Me too. It was tough at first with all the characters, but now I think I'm an expert.
It's not too hard to get into the Legion. And to make it even easier, we have a podcast called Long Live the Legion. We talk about different aspects of all its history to help you out.
So whether you're a new reader in the Legion Academy, or have your own flight ring, or anywhere in between, a Long Live the Legion podcast should be on your playlist.
All right, next up, and finally, is The New Adventures of Superboy #1, a 17-page story, also for 40 cents. Writer is Carrie Bates, penciler Kurt Schaffenberger, one of my favorite Superboy pencilers. Inker David Hunt, letterer Ben Oda, colorist Eugene D'Angelo, with a cover by Schaffenberger and Dick Giordano. The story is titled The Most Important Year of Superboy's Life. The synopsis is a slightly changed version from the DC Database Wiki. In the Kent household, among friends and family, Clark Kent prepares to blow out the candles on his cake, for it's his 16th birthday. Lana Lang badgers him to blow the candles out with one breath rather than several weak gasps, thinking his wish won't come true otherwise. Pete Ross questions as to why Clark's cake has 17 candles if it's his 16th birthday. Jonathan and Martha Kent explain that it is a Kent family tradition, and they see it as good fortune for the upcoming year. This isn't the entire truth, as we are shown a flashback to 8 years earlier. The Kents stand in the kitchen discussing the events of the previous night. Not only was it Clark Kent's 8th birthday, it also happened to be his debut as Superboy. Martha and Jonathan both agree that allowing Clark to begin his superhero career is the best birthday present he'll ever receive. Maybe, but that seems not exactly a responsible thing to do. Okay, anyway, they've accepted there was nothing more possible for them to teach him, right? And that he's more than ready. Meanwhile, in downtown Smallville, the citizens marvel as Superboy flies past. He is unaware, however, that he is being watched. While flying around, Superboy almost interrupts a pilot's stunt, incorrectly assuming that the man was going to crash. At the last minute, he notices the stunt pilot's show banner below him. Superboy can't seem to help himself from performing a few tricks of his own for the crowd. As he finishes, an alien spacecraft suddenly appears behind him, zapping the hero with a ray beam, which teleports him into their ship. Superboy finds himself lying on the floor. Strange and mysterious voices greet him, stating they are once again glad to see him. Of course, Superboy has no clue about what they're referring to. As he picks himself up, the aliens attempt to subdue Superboy, although he narrowly escapes and returns home. In the late afternoon at the Kent home, the family settles in the living room to watch home movies showing Clark shortly after he arrived on Earth. A few minutes pass by until the image is replaced by Clark's former captor's spaceship. The aliens reveal themselves to be Bryn and Mila. They hail from a plague-ridden planet, being the only survivors due to the experimental cure that they created. However, the cure worked too well, inhibiting Bryn and Mila's bodies from aging. They spent eons working on a cure for the cure. If it hadn't been for Clark's passing rocket, it would have remained theoretical. Using their technology, the aliens determined it was a being with great power residing within that rocket ship. But before they could intercept Kal-El's ship, a space warp knocked them light years away. They then teleport into the Kent living room and explain that Clark is their only salvation because they have created a device that will allow them to transfer his aging factor into themselves. The only problem with that is that once his aging factor is taken, he will forever be in an 8-year-old body. Clark's parents beg him not to do this, but Bryn and Mila try to persuade him otherwise. Clark leaves, taking the device and contemplating whether to remain eternally 8 or face the turmoils of adulthood. Superboy then zaps himself with the device, and when Superboy returns home, the aliens use the device on themselves, then use their science to remove Superboy's memories of these events shortly after they leave. In actuality, Superboy reveals to his parents that he countered the beam that would have taken his aging factor with his heat vision. He tells them that he figured if he tricked Bryn and Mila into thinking they could age again, they would. Superboy uses his telescopic vision to see if his plan has worked, and it has. He sees that they have aged a bit already. Clark then loses his memory of his encounter with the aliens, and his parents vow to put an extra candle on his birthday cake in appreciation that he will get older with every year. On the cover to this issue, at the very top, above the Superboy logo, is the declaration, quote, "First electrifying issue." Yes, I said that right. First electrifying. There's a misspelling. They misspelled electrifying on the cover. I'm just amazed that that somehow got past somebody. Below that, a happy 16th birthday banner sits above Superboy, who is flanked by Chief Parker, Lana Lang, and Pete Ross. Superboy is about to blow out the candles on his birthday cake when Martha interrupts, telling him he needs an extra candle or he can't celebrate. A caption box fills the bottom right corner asking, "Why? What is the secret that Superboy's parents must never reveal?" There's a lot going on in that cover, but still quite evocative. And I can only imagine the way that Schaffenberger drew all of this, just looked cool to me. Plus, I always liked the character of Superboy. So if Superboy turns 16 in this issue, I had this thought, does that mean he was pre-16 this entire time with the Legion? I just never thought of him as 15 or younger in the issues I would read later. Now, I suppose just because he leaves the Legion in issue 259 of his former title, and this is a new series after that, or, concurrently, doesn't mean this issue of Superboy follows sequentially in Superboy's timeline, if that makes sense. But anyway, that's how I think about it. It's like everything that came before this, he was 15 with the Legion, and now he's 16. So I don't know. The first thing that struck me on page 1 of the issue is Police Chief Parker thinking to himself that to be 16 again, quote, "footloose and fancy-free," would be his wish come true. Who knew Parker was so wistful? That one line gave Parker more dimension and intrigue than anything I recall reading with that character. Then on page 2, we get the start of the story in that Ma and Pa Kent are thinking back as to why they include that extra candle. And I'm hit with another oddity, that they were older 8 years prior than they are now. An editor's note explains that they were de-aged by an other dimensional chemical in Superboy issue 145. I vaguely recall knowing that somehow they had became younger, but I never read that story. Regardless, how did they explain this to their friends and neighbors? It turns out they didn't. They just tricked their contemporaries in Smallville to drink the same chemical, de-aging everyone. It was all one super gaslighting. I mean, they tricked their friends and neighbors into drinking some alien chemical. I mean, that's just not ethical. Anyway. Later, we are told that Superboy made his debut at age 8 and that he'd been training and dealing with his manifesting superpowers since he was 2. Could you imagine an 8-year-old with those powers? This is my first major issue with the story. While 8-year-old Superboy looks young enough thanks to Schaffenberger and Hunt, he thinks like a teenage kid. Or maybe that's supposed to be normal for a Kryptonian youth? I don't know. It's just crazy. Again, I come back to the superpowers thing. How did Ma and Pa Kent survive this? I liked how Bates ties this early tale into larger DC history with the appearance of Ace Morgan at the Stunt Pilot show. In case you are unfamiliar with that name, Ace is one of the founding members of the Challengers of the Unknown. I've always loved to see this kind of cross-promotional stuff in comics, even if we don't actually get to see Ace himself. This isn't DC Comics Presents, after all. After Superboy does a bit of stunt flying himself, he's kidnapped and taken aboard the spaceship. The announcer takes all of this in stride. First Superboy, who had only debuted the day before, and then a UFO shows up. Just people were unflappable back then, I guess. After Superboy returns home to watch the annual home movies of him, after the aliens make themselves known again by somehow broadcasting their own home movie onto the projector, and they introduce themselves, oh no. I just realized, this is embarrassing. I just realized that I said the alien, the male alien was named Bryn, but it was actually Byrne, Byrn. So that entire synopsis, I mispronounced his name. Probably thinking of Bryn Londo from Legion of Superheroes, I guess. But anyway, good Lord. I'm keeping it. Anyway, Byrn. And it occurred to me, is this an odd coincidence years before John Byrne remakes Superman? Is this a reference to John Byrne? I don't know. At first, their story parallels Kal-El's. Their planet died and they are affected by a stellar object. But in their case, they turned immortal. 3 million years later, they encountered Kal-El's rocket on its way to Earth. When they tell Superboy that he can save them from the curse of immortality, but he would have to remain an 8-year-old immortal, both of his parents object, but Superboy protests that he could handle immortality a lot better than these aliens did, who spent 3 million years with that affliction. Pa can't tell Superboy it is ultimately his decision and that they'll back him 100%. WTF, Pa? No 8-year-old, even a superpowered one, even a Kryptonian, as far as I'm concerned, is equipped to make such a massive decision. I mean, he looks at the alien syringe he was given with his X-ray vision and determines it contains nothing that will harm him. X-ray vision? How does that work? It's not like his X-ray vision contains a lab within it to evaluate what's in that concoction. Good Lord. While Superboy is away thinking over the offer, the aliens show the Kents what he's doing, and it's then that the philosophical debate commences. The Kents are worried about how lonely Clark will be, and the aliens counter with how Superboy will be around forever to help people. Don't you think that they should have had this conversation before Superboy left? And here is where we get a bit of Silver Age Superman tomfoolery, because Superboy actually tricks the aliens into thinking they were cured, a sort of psychological placebo effect. It turns out Superboy already knew he wasn't going to follow through with the aliens' plan, as he tells his parents, quote, "You don't really think I'd be reckless and immature enough to go through with their plan?" Maybe? It is very interesting that this first new Superboy comic in 35 years at that time spends its first issue telling a flashback story. Yeah, it shows what a smart young lad Superboy is, but why not tell a similar contemporaneous story? To get into the new status quo of Superboy, not part of the Legion at this time, Smallville, and his relationship with his supporting cast and everything. I guess maybe that's for issue 2. So it'd be interesting to see how this continues on. All right. While I like Spider-Man, I love Superboy. But Amazing Spider-Man 199, despite being very confused by it then, I think is a much more satisfying and enticing read. The New Adventures of Superboy is a bit too Silver Age-like frivolity for me. But darn if I wasn't totally into the series at that time. especially since it was something that I could collect from the get-go. Despite how I feel about the stories now, I did continue to buy Superboy and not Spider-Man consistently. Which do you think was the better issue? If you'd like to let me know that, please send feedback about this episode to longboxreview@gmail.com. You can leave voicemail or text me at 208-953-1841, or you can just contact me on social media at longboxreview. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye. After resting for a moment, the wall crawler realizes that he is completely dry and that he fell for another of Mysterios's